And welcome back to Who Would Win. Today's Who Would Win comes to us from LA, who asked the age-old timeless Avatar question: who would actually win in a fight, Korra or Aang? Let's get it out of the way right now. They did meet, but they would never fight. Most avatars, at least like the spirit realm, probably wouldn't fight each other unless it's like somehow a training thing. But in a scenario where timelines get crossed, they view each other as enemies, or there's like a Highlander thing, there could only be one. Who would win in the fight? Now, this all said, there is actually long ago, like years ago, and I mean years ago, there was a channel I watched for a while. They did verses, pretty good verses matchups. And I can't remember them for the life of me, the name of the channel, because they've long since, I think, just kind of retired, and therefore I just kind of lost them in my queue. But they did, basically they would look at each character's feats and compare them, and then actually work out the scenario, and they fought. And they did a lot better than I can. So really, I think that's the way we can look at this fight. There's obviously their physicality, what they do without their bending. Then there's each of their bending arts forms, their extra abilities, and then at the X factor with their personalities. If we're going by personality, Korra is the much more aggressive individual. She's a lot more hot-headed. Aang is an airbender by nature, raised by months, a lot more passive and defensive, only going on the offense when he absolutely has to. In terms of straight physical combat, too, without the aid of bending, Korra is the better fighter between the two of them. She's a legitimate brawler, and probably actually, as far as I can tell, actually knows like some sort of martial arts style. She's not a martial arts master or anything. She's not Tai Li. She's not even Zuko. But she is a very competent fist fighter, whereas Aang is definitely not. Now, Aang is able to defend himself with his staff to some degree, and use it like a bow staff. But it's not like he's a stick fighter by nature or anything like that. It's more of a secondary result of his glider. So you have their personalities and their physical abilities. Of course, seems to hold the edge. What about though with their actual bending? Well, in terms of where Aang holds the edges, I think anyone can agree Aang is a superior airbender. Even though it became like second nature to her later on in the series, Aang is a tried and true, even in just season 1, powerhouse airbender, able to literally freeze a volcano, with just cold air alone, freeze the lava volcano with cold air alone. He has been able to create tornadoes. It's even one of the reasons the air nomads were feared, despite their peaceful nature, because they could actually create hurricanes. Apparently, like typhoon bending is a thing. Actually controlling a hurricane is a thing. So Aang was clearly the superior airbender between the two of them. But then you get into the other bending, which is a little bit trickier. Korra is a tried and true natural waterbender. Now, in Avatar state, we've seen Aang do things that would be considered superior to anything I think she's demonstrated. But outside of that, everything Aang has demonstrated, she's demonstrated as well, except to a slightly higher degree, as it is her natural element. Add on her more aggressive, actual warrior-type fighting stature, and I'd say she probably holds the edge in waterbending. Earthbending is weird. She had the most difficulty with airbending. Aang had the most difficulty with earthbending, because it was his polar opposite, but for some reason, wind was her polar opposite because of her mentality. Very odd. But yeah, that being said, she's still a fantastic earthbender. Now, she got her ass whipped by old woman Toph, but even like Aang was never as good as Toph was. Still, we see like just in the series alone, like the extent of Aang's earthbending, even though he's not it is his hardest element to to use. We see him like create like rock and crystal armor. We see him manipulate crystals. We see him make that entire zoo using the elements he has at his disposal. Like that is not that's not something like we've never seen, as far as I can tell, Korra exhibit anything on that level in terms of earthbending. In terms of how she uses it in combat, though, she is probably the better earthbender, but because Aang was like a prodigy avatar to my degree. Like Aang was kind of a unique avatar. He stood out among avatars and how powerful he really was. Aang seems to have demonstrated the more powerful feats, but her use of earthbending makes her, I think, a little bit more dangerous. So I think that kind of evens out. She's got the edge in waterbending. They are roughly equal, but for different reasons of Earth, and then Aang's got the edge in air bending. But then that comes to fire bending, and both these individuals were natural firebenders. Aang particularly was actually had found it very easy to firebend, to the point where he accidentally hurt Katara. But Korra is also extremely extremely skilled in firebending. In fact, before she really got airbending down, it was also kind of her second nature bending to go to. We actually don't see a lot of Aang's bending or firebending because it was the last bending style he learned, and in the final season. Granted, it's still noted he's a very skilled firebender. But because we just don't have a lot, I have to go with Korra on that. Finally, though, we have their X factors, which would include their extra abilities. Both of them know spirit bending, so there's no way they're going to be able to one-up the other with that. They're both... Because Aang even learned how to... Aang is the one who showed her how to spirit bend and give bending back. So Aang's the one who showed her that. Then you have her ability to purify angry spirits. Doesn't mean a thing in this fight. She does have the ability to heal where Aang doesn't, so that's an extra ability she has. And then they both have the Avatar stage, which Aang, and for the longest time, could only go in the greatest of circumstances until he eventually learned how to do the style on his own. Korra actually learned how to do the Avatar state on her own pretty early on and used it quite often. However, hers just seems like seems to appear more like just a standard amp. Granted, we see her use it in some powerful ways, but it always just comes off like it's just like a standard, haha, I'm in the Avatar state now. This is my Super Saiyan form, basically. She just goes into it. Whereas Aang, this is like the first time, when Aang went into the Avatar state, every time he did it, he was causing sheer havoc every time he did it, until he eventually did it at will and had control over it against Ozai. And at that point, this was described basically as a force of nature. Like, he was leveling the landscape with compressed stones. He literally just leveled the landscape with a giant shot of bullets. If Korra's Avatar state was basically the equivalent of going Super Saiyan as it pertained to the Buu Saga and beyond, just like, okay, this is our standard amp. Aang's Avatar state was more like, oh, this is Super Saiyan turning into the Super Saiyan for the first time against Frieza, where I'm going to completely whip your ass. So that's kind of where it is. Aang seemed, at least from the way things were displayed, to be more powerful in his Avatar state. And he still had the ability to take bending away just with the earth, all that, with spirit bending and whatnot. So, or energy bending, I should say. So, who would win in a straight out fight? So I think Korra is definitely going to be holding the early fight edge. She's going to be able to push Aang back, keep him on the defensive more. Aang is going to definitely be able to deflect with his airbending more effectively than Korra is going to be able to attack with most of her attacks. I think Aang's airbending, honestly, is probably more powerful than most of all the other bending forms she has. Even if she is like extremely skilled, even has a better usage of that bending than Aang. I think his airbending is just that strong. He was shown to be an extremely powerful earthbender. And Aang, I think, will be able to keep the defensive ground in that fight for the most of the time. The problem is, I don't see Aang being able to gain much ground on the offensive side of the fight. She will be pressing his ass the entire time. Giggity. She will be pegging it. Good night, everybody. No, she will be pressing him the whole fight until basically she says, I've had enough, and goes into Avatar state and, really starts throwing everything she has at him. Conversely, though, at that point when Aang's like on the back burner and may actually be killed, that's when he goes into Avatar state and their Avatar states clash. Unfortunately, Avatar state-wise to Avatar state-wise, Korra just isn't really, from what we can see, isn't really stacked up compared to Aang. He just has shown far, and including the expanded lore too, the literature, which is like the graphic books and stuff like that. He just seems to be overall have a greater level of power in the Avatar state than she does, which is odd because she was the one after him, so she should have all the experience of the other avatars plus him, and yet, as far as you can tell, he just seemed more powerful. So yeah, and he goes into that sphere bubble, which has the wind, the earth, and the fire, and she, tries to do the same, and maybe they clash, but ultimately he's just had more wisdom, I think, even at a younger age than she did. So they clash, and ultimately it comes down to them trying to energy bend the other. That's where it really comes down to. And I said earlier that should basically cancel each other out, but in theory, one of them should have a stronger spirit than the other. So really, it's just going to be who can overpower the other spirit. And I do think it's Aang. We saw Aang. We saw both these characters have their broken moments, but Aang's broken moment really wasn't as bad as Korra's was. Korra was broken, was absolutely broken for a while, especially when she met Toph. She was just, whereas Aang was just in a bad way and quickly got over it within the episode. Korra took like a long time to get back to where she was. So Korra's spirit is more easily broken than Aang's is. So by that definition, if these two came to blows, put both their thumbs on each other's heads and tried to bend each other's energy, well, Aang, by default, because of how we saw they each handle their own difficulties, should have the stronger spirit and therefore should be able to take her bending away, whereas his bending would stay. Ultimately, I would probably lean towards Aang here. Again, his feats seem to be a bit more impressive. His mastery over the one element he is truly a master of seems to trump her mastery of the elements she's a master of, even though she has a better grasp over certain elements that he knows. Obviously, like I said, she's better at water bending. She seems to be better at fire bending, and they seem to be at least equal in different ways at earth bending, even though she's got a stronger foot in those door for both of those. I don't think her strength in water bending or fire bending can trump his strength in air bending. So, and again, I should note that I was not a huge Korra fan. I didn't even follow the series completely, but I do know enough about what happened. I know how it ended, all of that. So, so if someone disagrees with me, that's totally cool. I'm not gonna try to argue the point with you, especially as I've not fully watched Korra. I've seen enough of it to understand the character to a fair degree, but if I'm missing something, that's probably because I haven't watched the whole series. Where I did watch all of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I own all of Avatar: The Last Airbender. So yeah, that's my opinion. Take it for what it is. I think Aang would win the fight. But until then, that is my thoughts. What do you think in the comments below? Let me know. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.